let me share some stats with you that might establish why food and nutrition is so important, particularly in the context of our children. Right now, 1 in 5 children and teenagers in the US meets the definition or meets the criteria for having obesity. And it's not just about weight. Roughly 1 in 3 adolescents has prediabetes. And type 2 diabetes, which was once called adult onset diabetes, is now showing up in kids often enough that we've had to drop that name. It's just type 2 diabetes. And the number of children now living with type 2 diabetes has climbed significantly over the last 2 decades. This is a signal of the environment that our kids are growing up in today. And there are so many factors at play here. This is not to be alarmist or to frighten anyone. I'm telling you this to bring awareness to those who just don't know, because understanding it empowers us to be able to do something about it. And here's something that most people don't know, and something I wish more parents were told before being given a diagnosis. When type 2 diabetes shows up in kids and children, it tends to behave more aggressively than the same disease in an adult. The beta cells, or the insulin-producing cells of the pancreas, tends to wear down faster in kids. That's known as beta cell destruction. Type 2 diabetes in kids is also often harder to control with just first-line medications, which is typically metformin, and often requires multiple anti-diabetes medications to help control. In one major study of youth with type 2 diabetes, metformin monotherapy, the standard starting medication, failed to help study participants reach glycemic control for nearly half of the study participants, which was a higher failure rate than we see in adults. And because of this more aggressive phenotype or this more aggressive clinical course, unfortunately, that means that the complications can happen sooner in youth onset type 2 diabetes or children who develop type 2 diabetes. A long-term follow-up of those same young patients or participants found that many were already developing high blood pressure, kidney dysfunction, and nerve changes by their 20s and 30s. Those are the years that they should be at their healthiest. Essentially, there were high rates of complications from type 2 diabetes 15 years after diagnosis. And in my line of work, working in endocrinology, I diagnose and manage kids with type 2 diabetes on a daily basis. Kids as young as 9, 10, 11, 12, being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So hearing complications within 15 years of diagnosis for a youth diagnosed with type 2 diabetes is very hard to hear. And because here's the thing that we often tell ourselves: kids are resilient. They'll bounce back. They'll run it off at recess. They don't have to worry about balanced nutrition now. They have their whole lives to straighten that out. And I understand a little bit why we say that, right? Like, it kind of takes the pressure off a little bit. But it rests on this idea that I do want to address, because I also address this in adults. This is not a discussion about calories. It's not a discussion about the weight on the scale. This is a topic and a discussion about metabolic health and learned healthy behaviors. It's about insulin resistance. And insulin resistance can build for years to even decades until science starts or labs become abnormal. Kids are developing insulin resistance for years. Meanwhile, their routine lab work looks normal until it doesn't. And then you finally see an abnormal A1C or an abnormal blood glucose level. And there are some earlier warning signs for insulin resistance that I've mentioned on this channel and that I can go into deeper in another video. But today I'm going to stay on the topic of nutrition. So I say all this to say that nutrition is foundational when it comes to preventing or reversing insulin resistance and stabilizing blood sugar levels, stabilizing insulin levels. Because a child is not just a small adult with more time on the clock. In some ways, that clock can actually run faster, especially when it comes to complications of type 2 diabetes, which means that those years that we think are a buffer when they're children are actually the years that matter the most. So this old mentality needs to be revisited. And this is not a reason to panic. Again, I'm not trying to be alarmist here, but I'm saying this because it's a reason to reframe how we're thinking. It's a reason to lead these tiny humans deliberately as a society and in the home. Okay, before I talk about the 5 strategies of what we can do, I understand that this is not for lack of caring. I truly think that if this were simply a matter of not caring enough, none of us would be in this struggle. We wouldn't be seeing these rates of childhood obesity and type 2 diabetes on the rise the way that we do. It's not for a lack of caring. As parents and adults in charge of the care of children, we're up against a lot. Your child spends so much of the day eating food you either did not see or did not prepare. School meal programs, as much as we can say about them, I truly think that they mostly are doing their best on a tight budget and in some cases with very limited resources. But I think that it's safe to say they're often not structured with your child's optimal metabolic health in mind. Then there's this entire food industry that spends real money studying how to make these non-nutritious foods the most irresistible that they can be. With so much of the marketing aimed straight at our kids, straight at children. Bright packaging, their favorite cartoon characters, these nutrient-deficient snacks just marketed as fun. And on top of that, you're still dealing with the very same challenges that you face with your own health journey and your own nutrition habits. The ones I've talked about in my previous videos. Busy schedule, not having time to cook, not having the energy at the end of the day, giving into the more convenient option because of those things. The path of least resistance is often the one that's the least nutritious. So our kids are dealing with the same struggle, the same design. But with all of that, there is still hope because a design is something that can be modified. The first area of modification starts in the one place where you have the most say. Because the reality is, as much as you want to and as much as I want to, we can't rewrite the school menu, at least not tomorrow. We can't pull the commercials and marketing off the screens or the packaging. We can't pull all the candy off the checkout shelves. Now, those changes are hopefully coming someday, but not soon enough to help us right now. But there is this one place where we still have some authority, our home. So I propose that to the best of your ability and your resources, that we be more deliberate about what we eat and how we eat within our homes. And I know that both ability and resources are different for each household. I know, which is why I emphasize to the best of your ability. You are your child's first and most important nutrition teacher. Often before a healthcare provider or a health class, there's you and your dinner table and your home. The way they come to see food, the habits they form, the tastes they develop, eating habits and behaviors that gets normalized, the way they interact with food, most of that gets set at home. And oftentimes by watching us, big humans. So no, we're not gonna try to control the whole external environment. Instead, we're gonna put most of our efforts where they may have the biggest effect. Let's lead well under our own roofs. Let me show you what that can look like in 5 strategies. It's dinner time. It's been a long, busy day of work. And now you're sitting in your kitchen making a plate, but this isn't your plate. It's your kid's plate. And you already know what's about to go down. You know the 1 or 2 things that they're actually gonna eat. And you know the 1 vegetable that's gonna come back untouched, at least without a struggle. So you decide to move the goalpost because again, it's been a long day. You're tired. And you're not trying to pick this battle tonight. So the goal is no longer to have a healthy, well-balanced meal for dinner. It's simply to have a fed child. So you give them the version that you know they're gonna eat. And that might mean wiping off the vegetables from the plate or going back in the kitchen and heating up some dino bites or cooking the Aunt Annie's pasta or their favorite box mac and cheese. And I'm not shaming you. I've made that plate before too. But here's the other thing that might be happening. Somewhere in the back of your mind, there might be this one question, especially if your family history includes, say, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, insulin resistance, or borderline diabetes, aka prediabetes, or if you yourself are dealing with insulin resistance or have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, then you might be asking yourself this one question. And that one question is, am I setting my child up for the same road that I've watched a loved one go down, or the same road that I'm going down myself? And for those of you who have a child or children who have been diagnosed with insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, prediabetes, or type 2 diabetes, my heart is with you. And if you or your children are struggling with nutrition, stay with me here because this video just might help. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 strategies to help get that dinner plate looking more balanced again. Hello, if this is our first time meeting here, my name is Jessica Johnson. I am a board-certified family nurse practitioner and certified diabetes care and education specialist. On this channel, I share clinical insights, metabolic health education, and practical tips for stewarding your body well. Okay, back to it. Before I go any further, I need to draw a very careful line because I don't want to send the wrong message here. One, nutrition in and of itself is a very sensitive topic, which I understand. Also, if your child has feeding challenges related to sensory processing or has a diagnosed feeding disorder such as ARFID, sensory food aversion, or any other diagnosed feeding disorder, this video is not speaking to that. Those are separate and significant challenges, often require the support of a specialized or multidisciplinary team. So if that's you, then please seek or continue to follow the guidance of your pediatrician and your medical team. What I'm talking about today is ordinary or garden variety picky eating, the kind that's learned out of habits or through a food environment that seems to be working against us. If this is your situation, then this video is for you. The first strategy is the simplest and possibly the most powerful. Cook more of your food at home. Now, don't get me wrong, I know how that can sound after a long, busy day, either working outside the home, working inside the home, not to mention if your kids have sports after that long day of work. So here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying you need to cook a 5-course meal or gourmet style meal. I'm not saying you have to cook from scratch every night. I'm not even saying that you actually have to cook every single night. What I'm saying is that when you prepare food from home, you know exactly what's in it. You can control the quality of the ingredients and how much of those ingredients go on your child's plate. Whenever you can, as often as you can, sit and eat together. A child who regularly eats meals as a family tends to eat healthier. And along with that, something else happens too. They learn that food is something that you gather around, not something you grab and have alone. And as the parents or the adults in the home, you get to model eating that balanced meal and eating pacing even. You're also modeling undistracted eating, especially if you also have a rule of no screens at the dinner table. All of these things can be learned and your kids can pick up on this. Now, the second strategy is one that people can often find kind of hard to hear. So I'm just gonna say it plainly, but kindly. Try not to enable picky eating by default. And again, disclaimer, this is not relevant for children with diagnosed feeding disorders. So outside of that, here's the mindset that I want to challenge. That idea that vegetables, meats, whole grains are grown-up foods. That a balanced dinner is for adults. That the kids get the kids' menu version. That's not really a rule by nature. It's more of a habit or a societal norm that is not moving things in our favor, especially for those of us who struggle with the selective eating habits. And of course, these restaurants can easily reinforce it, right? But broccoli and quinoa are not adult foods. They're just food. Children are known to be wary of new flavors, but that tends to fade with more exposure. In a parent-led study, simply offering a disliked vegetable, a small taste at a time, day after day, steadily raised how much children actually liked it and ate it. Now, it can take many tries, far more than many of us give before we end up throwing in the towel. All that to say that a rejected vegetable now does not have to be a rejected vegetable forever. But do know that it can take several tries. So keep offering those real whole foods as calmly as you can, which I know can be challenging at the end of a very long day, but try not to turn it into a food war. And you're not being mean by being persistent. You're teaching your kids and you're modeling it too. Now, this third strategy turns this food war or food fight into more of a project or partnership. And it's to involve them. A child is far less likely to feel ambushed by broccoli showing up on their plate if they were standing next to you when you put the broccoli in the shopping cart, or if they were somehow involved in the food selection process. So if it works for your family's routine, let them pick a vegetable at the grocery store, maybe even one that you wouldn't have chosen. That way it can be a new experience for everybody, the whole family, but it gets them involved in that process. Or if taking them all to the grocery store is a no-go that you've already decided because you know that they're just gonna ask for all the things, we just talked about all that fancy marketing, no problem. I'm not gonna push on that one. You can still include them in the meal planning process. Have them pick out a fruit, pick out one vegetable, and even a whole grain for the week. I love doing this with my son. And what that looks like in our household is this. So during our weekly meal planning process, my son and I choose 1 to 2 meat options for the week, 2 to 3 vegetables for the week, and 1 to 2 fruits for the week. And we have our pantry items. He may select the bean of the week. We have our quinoa, which is a staple, and we have our staple dairy products to include eggs, cheeses, yogurt. And what that looks like is pretty basic, nothing fancy. We simply literally write things out on a little board that hangs near our kitchen. He helps me decide what we're gonna have for the week. This is one way to get the family involved that you can try. involving them in the meal planning process. The other part is safely involving them in the meal prep process. Let them wash the vegetables, tear the lettuce leaves off, stir the pot if it's appropriate and safe to do so, or chop, again, if it's safe and appropriate to do so. They're seeing the vegetables that's going to be on their plate soon. Give them a role in the meal prep process. You can even keep a weekly menu if you plan that far in advance, that's on the refrigerator or somewhere in the kitchen that you can read, or if they're of age, they can read themselves. So they already know what to expect when that dinner plate arrives. 2 things in particular happen when you do this. First, the food stops being a surprise that's sprung on them at the last minute at the dinner table. And it starts being something that they helped contribute to because they helped you plan it, they helped you make it. Everything is familiar, it's not foreign, it's not a surprise. And second is the long game. You are handing them and teaching them a skill. A 10-year-old who knows how to build a balanced plate eventually becomes a 20-year-old adult who is not left to the mercy of marketing when it comes to figuring out what to eat. So you're not just feeding them tonight, you're teaching them how to feed themselves into adulthood. These lessons that they're learning now as children will take them and carry them into adulthood. All right, now the 4th strategy is to anchor the plate with protein. Protein is often that macronutrient that can go missing on the kid's plate, to include a dinner plate. Now with adults, yeah, we can have a hard time hitting our protein targets, but our dinners usually have more substance, and usually protein is kind of the center of a dinner. But for kids, that dinner plate can often be missing protein because of those picky eating selections, right? Like French fries, mac and cheese, things like that. They don't pack much protein. And so much of what's marketed to kids is refined carbohydrates that's wrapped up in fun packaging, right? And usually void or significantly deficient in protein, fiber, and other micronutrients. And yet they still have real needs. They need the balanced meals. They need protein too. I'm not talking about calorie counting, and I'm not talking about putting your child on a diet. This is simply being mindful of creating a balanced plate that includes protein. We want protein to be showing up for meals and snacks. So the structure for this strategy is teaching your child what foods contain protein and where the protein comes from in the foods that they eat. One of the things that I do with my son is whenever especially if he's asking for a treat or when he's making his plate, I'll ask him, where's the protein? And that way he knows which of the food that he's eating has protein in it. And it's also a trigger to remind him, oh yeah, I need to add protein to this. He's a little bit older, he's 11 now. So teaching young how to identify the specific macronutrients is helpful so that they can start thinking on their own when they're making a plate. Now the 5th strategy is about how you talk about all this. And it might be the one that has the longest lasting impact or impression on our kids. Teach them the why behind why you're making these demands as they might feel, or you're setting these habits, or you're modeling these behaviors. It actually teaches them the why of the behavior. And I'm gonna preface this by saying we try not to sell based on fear. More on that in a moment. Warning a 9-year-old, preteen, teenager about a disease or potential complications years to decades down the line often does not move them to make any change. You might be surprised, but I see this very often in clinic, and I truly understand why parents do this. It's out of real concern and sometimes real desperation. They reach for fear as the lever to pull, hoping it gets their child to make a change, to stay consistent with their nutrition or activity, or to take a medication as prescribed. But it rarely produces the change that they're hoping for. More often than not, it creates tension between parent and child, and the behavior stays exactly where it was. And that's a very challenging situation to navigate and to remedy, but it can be done. So instead of fear, give them a reason they can feel today. Children live in the present, so tie the food and the movement to the things they already want. Your child or children are active in sports? Great. Speak to how the way they eat influences their athleticism. The protein on their plate is what builds the muscle so they can run faster, throw farther, kick harder, play harder in the sports that they love. The real food and that activity help energize them so that they can focus in class instead of fading by noontime, allowing them to keep their energy throughout the day instead of crashing after lunch. When you frame it this way, the healthy behaviors, healthy food options, encouragement and support become less of a rule that you're enforcing and becomes more of that thing, that vehicle to help them get the strong and capable body so that they can get to do the things that they actually want to do. They get to see how this is going to benefit them now versus working to do something to prevent something that's years to decades in the future. They start to develop that internal motivation. Then they get to see the the outcome of these behaviors, how it helps with their athleticism, how it helps them to focus in school, how it helps them to study longer. And when they see that return and that benefit, they remember that, so that down the line, these behaviors become habits, and habits that they can take into their adulthood. So even if there's a family history, they are equipped with the lifestyle behaviors to help them mitigate the risk for progressing into complications or worsening disease, or to prevent the conditions from happening in the first place, despite a family history. And that's where this lands for me. Not only am I a clinician who manages these conditions every single day, but I too come from a family line of chronic metabolic health conditions. And I've lost family members far too soon to preventable chronic conditions. And now as a clinician and as a mother, I know what habits can significantly reduce a person's risks for developing these chronic conditions. And when chronic conditions are in the picture, what lifestyle interventions actually move the needle towards preventing or halting disease progression, and in some cases reversing or putting up a condition into remission. But because of my family history, I'm not speaking out of theory. I'm speaking out of lived experience, and I'm speaking out of clinical experience, and I'm speaking out of personal experience. I'm speaking as a person who carries that same family history in her bloodline, and I'm speaking as a mother who does not want to see her child develop these same preventable chronic conditions, God willing, and to the best of my ability in stewarding his health. So I do these things in my own home too, imperfectly. I am not standing here at the finish line telling you how it's done. I am in it with you, choosing the next meal a little more on purpose than the last one. And not out of fear, but out of love, out of care, and out of refusal to lead my son down a road that I've already seen take people I love too soon. So, God willing, and to the best of my ability in stewarding his health well, I try daily. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 6 and 7, it says, "These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up." And I know he's talking about the commandments here, but he's talking about teaching. And where does that teaching happen? The teaching happens at home, along the road, sitting down to a meal, the everyday places. It reminds me that raising a child well, mind, body, and soul, it's built in the ordinary moments of everyday life. The plate you make tonight is one of them. Our children are beautiful gifts entrusted to us. And the daily care we give them, right down to how we feed them, is part of that trust. So here's my question for you. What's one small thing that you could change at your dinner table this week, or within your home this week? Just one. Share it in the comments, and let's support one another this week. If you haven't noticed, so much of the same things that protects our kids are what protects us. As adults, the way we eat is one of the biggest lessons that we're teaching our kids. We're modeling, they're watching, and they're learning. So getting your own house in order, so to speak, getting your own nutrition habits in order is where this all begins. So if you are having a hard time with your own nutrition, and if you are really struggling to consistently eat home-cooked meals, struggling with time in a busy schedule, in my last video, I shared on my process for batch cooking, which is how I can cook once and have a variety of home-cooked meal options to last me the entire work week. If that sounds interesting to you, then you can watch that video right here, and I'll see you in the next one.